Thank you very much for joining for this briefing, another one of the WHO Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization, the SAGE, presenting its interim recommendations on the Janssen vaccine, the AD26.CoV2.S vaccine. And of course, our experts will go into depth on this one. Before I let the experts talk, let me just walk through the procedures and then make a comment here. So you heard, you saw in the line the document, the recommendation is still under embargo. That's fine. That means the documents will be live on the website as of 1300 Central European time. The briefing now is live cast on some occasions, so that's completely fine. So we are not under embargo now, just to stress this right away. Secondly, after the introductory remarks and the explanations by Professor CRAVIOTO, we'll open the floor for questions. Before I introduce the guests, let me also say we do have this briefing as a SAGE expert group meeting on the Janssen vaccine. This is not the Global Advisory Committee on Vaccine Safety on any of the vaccines or on the AstraZeneca vaccine. Please bear that in mind, A, throughout the briefing, and B, before we get into the questions. So again, this is the SAGE briefing on the Janssen vaccines, not the Global Advisory Committee on Vaccine Safety. Thank you. And with this, let me introduce our guests and our speakers today. So of course, we have with us the chair of the Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization. That's Professor Alejandro CRAVIOTO, joining us online. Thank you and welcome. We have Dr. Kate O'Brien, Director for the Department of Immunization, Vaccines and Biologicals from WHO. Good morning, Dr. O'Brien. Oh, by the way, it's actually noon. And finally, last but not least, Dr. Annelies Wilder-Smith, Technical Advisor to the SAGE Secretariat here at WHO. Hello and welcome to everyone from wherever you're listening. And let me hand over straight to Professor CRAVIOTO. Over to you.
Good morning from my side. Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you're joining us from. As Christian said, the Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization met on Monday to review the evidence related to the Janssen vaccine against SARS-CoV-2, AD26.CoV2.S, and we have the following recommendations to make. After reviewing the evidence, we have a vaccine that shows to be safe, and it shows to have the necessary efficacy to be recommended by us for use in people above the age of 18 without an upper age limit. This is a one single dose vaccine given intramuscularly, which is a regular advantage in the sense of having the capacity to vaccinate more people, but not different in reality in its capacity to protect against severe disease or death or hospitalization than all the other ones that we have already reviewed and recommended. The vaccine is relatively safer than others in the sense of knowledge for use in pregnant women, since we have the experience with another Janssen vaccine based on the same adeno-26 platform that has been extensively used to control Ebola outbreaks in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in other parts of West Africa. In fact, there is a follow-up of close to 1,600 women, pregnant women that were vaccinated with this Ebola vaccine, in which it was shown that the risk-benefit of vaccinating them against the risk of having severe Ebola disease was totally justified. And the same can be said for women who are breastfeeding. In this case, we do have follow-up of another vaccine with the same platform, the one for Ebola, showing that it is safe for women who need to be vaccinated and at the same time are breastfeeding their children. In the sense of the vaccine, whether the vaccine should be given to people who have already been exposed to the virus, we continue to recommend that they do. And in this case, we still recommend as an act of solidarity due to the scarcity of vaccines, to wait up to 6 months if you have been infected to be able to give the others a chance to get their first doses. However, in countries where you have an issue of circulation of what we call variants of concern, these are the variants that are circulating that have been shown to have either more transmissibility, the capacity to infect others, or in the papers in the last week, more capacity to cause a severe disease and death. Then we recommend that you do not wait to get vaccinated more than a week or two if you have already been infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. As we have said with the other vaccines, we believe that given the notes in our WHO prioritization roadmap that Sage presented and endorsed some months ago, we believe that groups that are disproportionately at risk of being infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus should be vaccinated first. That means, of course, our frontline workers, people who are in direct care or services for people who are infected, and of course, those that live in environments where the virus circulates in a much wider capacity. In that sense, we feel that this gives the vaccine the chance to really help stop the pandemic. We do not recommend the vaccine for people traveling. There's still no information related to the safety of that. And we still do not recommend any type of certificate for traveling, because that's the prerogative of the International Health Regulations Group that has already said that this is not the time to establish those type of controls. In the countries where there is a high spread of the variants, and in countries where we now have information about the use of this vaccine to control SARS-CoV-2 caused by these variants, we recommend that you use it. And that would be, for example, data coming out of the USA, Europe, Africa, South Africa, Brazil, etc. I think that regarding the vaccine, that would be my last message, except that we are continued to insist that there needs to be a coordinated approach regarding the vigilance of the circulation of the variants, and that requires countries to share information, to increase the search for these variants through systems that allow them to sequence the viruses and see where they are, and especially how high-risk groups are affected by these issues. In the case of children below 18 years of age, we still do not have a vaccine that is useful for them. The Pfizer one has been recommended up to 16 years, but that's all. But we know that there are a number of vaccines being already tested in children up to 12 years or even younger, and we hope to have that information soon to be able to protect that group also. Christian, I would leave it there and start opening the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor CRAVIOTO. With this, we're heading right over to the questions. I see a longer list already, and we're taking it right from the top. Again, just to remind everyone, this is the briefing, the SAGE briefing on the Janssen vaccine. Jamie Keaton, please.
Hi, Christian. Thank you very much for taking my question. I wanted to just ask, generally, there's been a lot of questions about the vaccines in general. And I'm just wondering if you could give us sort of a blanket statement about the importance of vaccination campaigns, and if you have any concerns about suspensions of vaccines. And I'm sorry to do this, but if Dr. O'Brien is there, maybe she could address just the AstraZeneca situation. I know that it's not the briefing today, but it's the thing that is on everybody's mind. Dr. O'Brien, is there any possibility that EMA or WHO or AstraZeneca could tweak the recommendations that they have if there are certain dangers that may be found without actually recommending a full suspension of use of a vaccine like AZ? Thank you so much.
So before I hand over to the two experts, we are expecting to maybe come for a statement by the Global Advisory Committee on Vaccine Safety to have a statement out today. Again, we're expecting it. It may come, it may not come. It's up to the committee. That should cover most of it, but maybe Dr. O'Brien can then give a quick remark in overall. But maybe I'm going to ask Professor CRAVIOTO for an overall statement on the importance of vaccination campaigns in general before we get a bit deeper into with Dr. O'Brien. Is that okay, Professor CRAVIOTO?
Does the question refer just to the COVID-19 vaccines, or is the question about all vaccinations covering? Because that's our worry. Our worry is that the COVID vaccines are taking the place of our vaccination programs worldwide, and we're not immunizing enough children with the basic vaccines because we're dedicated to the other parts. We have programs for the elderly, which have not been part of many vaccination programs in our countries, and therefore we insist that the children should receive their normal vaccines within the safety measures that we can have for these processes, but we cannot continue to delay the process of vaccinating as we normally do with all the other vaccines that we have available, because then we're going to have a massive problem related to outbreaks of things that we haven't seen in years in many parts of the world. If it relates to the COVID vaccines, we feel that the issue of availability is very important, but as soon as a country can have access to these vaccines, they must have a vaccination program in place to be able to use them effectively and efficiently, in the sense of trying to protect first the people that we have prioritized as essential workers, because they are the ones who are keeping the rest of the population safe. And then, of course, the age stratification according to how we have defined the groups, so that you have protection against the people who are more liable to get sick and more liable to die from the pandemic. I think what I would like, if you don't mind, is to ask Annelies if she could also tell us, with this vaccine, two factors that have been important in the sense of our recommendations that go a bit further to what I said at the beginning.
Thank you. Yeah, let me ask Dr. Wilder Smith to comment on that, as you just said, and then go to Dr. O'Brien for more general remarks on the other vaccines. Over. Dr. Smith, Wilder Smith, please.
Thank you. So we want to highlight again that this vaccine is a non-replicating vaccine. So it's inactivated. It has no infective materials. It does not contain preservatives, adjuvants, materials of animal origin, which is important. So it is halal. It is also, it does not contain any fetal tissues. This is overall a vaccine where we have a good safety profile, and based also on the extensive experience from the AD26 platform, we have also good data on pregnancy. I think this is what Alejandro wanted me to talk about. Happy to add anything.
Thank you very much. And let me hand over to Dr. O'Brien. Dr. Kate O'Brien, please.
Yeah, we will, as we've said, try and constrain this this press conference to the Johnson & Johnson product, but I will just make some general comments about the AZ situation with respect to how we deal with any potential adverse event for any vaccine. And the specific question you asked, Jamie, was, can a product insert be tweaked, or can the recommendations be tweaked? I think that was the word you used, to adjust them as more information comes through. And the answer to that is that is always the case. Vaccine recommendations are dynamic. We continue to look at the evidence on all vaccines as it continues to come through over weeks, months, years, but particularly for new vaccines in those early phases of use. And of course, we're in an unprecedented situation with the rapid scale out of vaccines. So we're getting a lot of information with the millions of doses that are being used around the world. I also want to just draw your attention to examples of vaccines without pointing to any one specific vaccine, but just to give you an example. It's not that it's not a unique example, but we do have situations where a vaccine does have rare events that are associated with a vaccine. The rotavirus vaccine, we know, has an association with intussusception events. and those are rare events, the benefit of rotavirus vaccine far outweighs the risk of those rare events, but recognizing that they can occur allows management of those events in the the rare events that do occur. So certainly recommendations are adapted to new information and an assessment of that benefit risk profile as that benefit profile changes, and often the benefit profile increases over time as we get more and more measurements of what vaccine impact really is. And the risk profile matures in terms of what we understand about risks of vaccines, notwithstanding that for some vaccines there are rare significant events that do need to be managed.
Thank you very much, all. And with this, we go to the next question. Gunilla van Hall, Svenska Dagbladet, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
All good.
Thanks for taking my question. It's on Janssen or Johnson & Johnson, the vaccine. There have been cases in the study of similar bleedings and clots, even though rare, as in the case of AstraZeneca. How worrying is this? Do you think countries should keep a closer look on this? And even if there is an association, as you mentioned, in the case of Janssen, is it also that the benefit will be bigger than the risk? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gunilla, we'll start with Dr. Wilder-Smith, please.
Sorry. So I'm now unmuted. Thank you, sorry. Indeed, the trial had about 44,000 subjects. So half of them, about 22,000, did not receive the vaccine and therefore are called a placebo arm. And indeed, in that group, and that's good to know as a comparison or as a background, there were 10 cases of thromboembolic events, so clots, be it either deep vein thrombosis or pulmonary embolism or another blood clot. So this is your background. So there were 10 in 22,000 in the placebo arm. In the vaccinated arm, in the arm that in the group that received the Johnson vaccine, there were 14 events, also out of 22,000. So this is about the same. There's a slight imbalance, but it's still not statistically significant. I have to add that obviously thromboembolic events are indeed a phenomenon of the disease itself, of COVID-19 itself. And therefore, we do need to look out for thromboembolic events in general, and we are.
Thank you very much for this important clarification. Let's move on to Peter Kenny, please.
Actually, I was going to ask a similar question. So could you just elaborate a bit more on the thromboembolic elements in COVID-19? Is it more likely to be due to the COVID or to the vaccine? If you could just elaborate a bit more on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that gives us an opportunity to clarify that, and the comparison with the placebo arm and the vaccine arm was also very important. Dr. Wilder-Smith, can I ask you to elaborate a bit, and then we see if somebody else wants to come in. Over.
Sure. We need to be reminded that the vaccine intentionally recruited persons that are at higher risk of COVID. So older persons, persons with comorbidities, obesity, who may have naturally already a higher risk of thromboembolic events. So I think we could use this, the 10 out of the 22,000, as kind of a background. And to your question, whether COVID as a disease is associated with thromboembolic event, in fact, COVID really predisposes patients through, it causes a hypercoagulable state, where indeed many of the deaths that we see, or in the severe cases, are due to thromboembolic events. As for the vaccine itself, we have not seen it in a trial that, there's no reason to think and no biological plausibility as far as we understand now that the vaccine could cause thromboembolic events itself. However, we have to be open for new events and we have to take it seriously and we have to look at all the data. And I think those data will come out tomorrow when the EMA also takes a very, very serious look at all the details. Over.
And to know that thrombotic events are having a fairly high percentage in a normal population anyway. All right, let me head over to Kate O'Brien for further comments. Dr. O'Brien, please.
Yeah, I just think we want to emphasize this is being very carefully looked at by both EMA and WHO. I think, as everybody knows, they were expecting EMA to have a statement out, a decision out about their assessment tomorrow. And the WHO Global Advisory Committee on Vaccine Safety is undertaking a similar review. So you can fully expect that there will be an assessment done looking at the benefit-risk ratio related to this vaccine and related to this safety signal. I think what's also important is there are clear statements out both from WHO and EMA that at this point, the benefit-risk assessment is to continue with vaccination. There are many countries that are continuing with vaccination. Vaccines, we did speak about the importance of vaccine campaigns and assuring that the pace of these vaccine campaigns is providing protection as early as possible to people. So I just want to emphasize that events occur when hundreds of millions of people are being vaccinated. All of the usual things that are happening to people with respect to their health will continue to happen to them, unrelated to whether or not they were vaccinated or not. And of course, the main point here is to try and separate out events that are related or potentially related to a vaccine from events that are happening coincident with, but not related to the vaccine itself, and teasing those things out with respect to time and clustering of events. Sometimes there are clustering events that is coincidental, and sometimes they happen related to an exposure, in this case, a vaccine. So that's the work of these committees, is to deliberate on all of that evidence that is coming in from all corners of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me move to the next question, and that's Bodhi Hugger from Phoenix TV. Bodhi, over to you, please.
Thank you for taking my questions. I tried to put the two questions together. According to the COVAX vaccine list, some vaccines from China ranked ahead of Johnson & Johnson. Why we haven't seen the research results from Chinese vaccines? Is that the random sequence, or because of Chinese vaccines lack the support of international standard research documents? And what is the process for WHO or SARS to review the candidate vaccines? Thank you.
I'll take that, if I may. So, Sage, first of all, the interest of WHO is to have as many vaccines from wherever they come in the world to be deployed, to be reaching EUL and to be used around the world. Our interest is to provide, to assure that the world has the vaccines that are needed everywhere and anywhere in the world for everyone and anyone who needs these vaccines to have that access. The assurance that WHO provides is that any product that goes through the EUL process successfully is essentially affirming that there is those products are meeting the international standards for safety, efficacy, and quality of manufacturing. And as a result of a WHO EUL listing, then country regulatory authorities can rely on that assessment that has been done and move with speed for their own regulatory processes and rely on the dossier that has been reviewed if the manufacturers allow for the sharing of that dossier. That process is going on for a number of candidate vaccines, including several Chinese candidate vaccines that are in a very mature phase of that assessment in EUL. There is a document, perhaps somebody can put the link up in the chat, that provides you with a weekly update of the progress of each of the products that has come to WHO to seek EUL listing. The important thing I want to emphasize there is WHO can go only as fast as the data that are submitted by the manufacturer to WHO. We are totally reliant on the manufacturers providing the information that is needed and requested, and the responsiveness of manufacturers to provide the data in the format that is needed and in the detail that it's needed. And we work iteratively with manufacturers to give them feedback about what more is needed and whether or not what they've already provided is sufficient. But that is the pace at which we can go. We can't make it go any faster than the pace at which manufacturers respond. There is a separate process, which is the SAGE process. And this is the policy process. So EUL is about the safety, efficacy, and quality of manufacturing. So that's sort of answering the question if a vaccine could be used. And the policy process answers the question of how a vaccine should be used. It is an independent process. So it's a separate set of experts and independent experts that review for safety, efficacy, programmatic use. The SAGE is not the entity that looks at quality of manufacturing. In WHO, we have these two processes very carefully lined up because clearly we would not have a policy process if we don't already have assurance that the regulatory process is near the completion. So we are in the process of a number of different manufacturers have presented their information to the SAGE work group that is focusing on COVID vaccines. That includes several Chinese manufacturers and other manufacturers. SAGE has set the standard that we will review any product that has either emergency use listing from WHO or has authorization through a stringent regulatory authority. So SAGE will focus its time on those products where the regulatory process has been assured through either of those two processes. And that's the timing that we follow. So in a sense, the policy process is also subject to the ability of the manufacturers to provide information through the regulatory process. And similarly, we have a set of standards for the type of information that the expert group requires and the way in which the information is provided, and have been working carefully with manufacturers, including in China, for going back and forth about what information is needed. We do expect to have next week on the SAGE schedule a first session on two of the Chinese manufactured products, Sinopharm and Sinovac. And that session will be to begin the information for SAGE, but because the emergency use listing has not been completed, we will not be asking for a recommendation from SAGE because we're not at that phase yet.
Thank you very much for this really important clarification. And maybe time for me to add, there's the regular SAGE meeting that Dr. O'Brien just mentioned starting next week, Monday 22 and going until 25 March to my knowledge. With this, we'll head over to the next question. That's Jamil Shad. Jamil, please unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
All good.
Very good. Mr. CRAVIOTO, a question on the 6-month delay of vaccines. I'm a journalist from Brazil. You mentioned that in the case of Brazil, the 6 months should not be weighted, basically. I have two clarifications on that. That is a recommendation to all vaccines, correct? Not only Janssen. Secondly, Why is that? Why are you asking Brazilians basically to go and vaccinate themselves, even if they have had it? If you could just elaborate so we can explain to the public in a better way also. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the question. I think it's very important. First of all, I think the problem in Brazil, as you well know, is the circulation of the variant that has really affected places like Manaus, where you have had a resurge of infection even after people had been already infected the first time. So in that sense, the problem of waiting was initially an issue of solidarity. Since we don't have enough vaccines for everybody and we need to raise the minimum amount of protection in as many people in the population as possible, what we said is, looking at the way that the follow-up studies have shown that a person who has been infected, even with an asymptomatic infection, can have protection for at least 6 to 8 months, then we said, before the variant really started circulating, that if you could wait by your own choice for 6 months so that all the other people who had not been vaccinated or had not been infected could be vaccinated with at least 1 dose of the vaccine, then you would be helping for your country to be able to achieve this level of what we call herd immunity in a faster way. And that especially the vaccines could be actually used to protect the high-risk groups, such as the health workers or the frontline workers, to be able to be of benefit for the whole population. With the circulation of the variants, and especially in places where there is a high circulation, South Africa, Brazil, now the United States, be the V117, we have decided that in those situations, we don't recommend people waiting to get vaccinated, even if they have been exposed to the virus, because as we have seen in those people, the booster from the vaccination in the first dose allows them to be more confident that we have a much fuller protection in them to be able to avoid an infection, even by the variants, if they have already been infected by the first virus. So in that sense, that's where the recommendation comes from. If your country doesn't have the circulation of a variant, the situation of the access of vaccine is small, because vaccines are not arriving in sufficient quantity for a higher number in your population, and you have been infected and decide to wait, that's perfect. But if you are in a place where you have a circulation of variants and that exposes you to have a second infection by this new virus, then we don't recommend that you wait if you have access to a vaccine in those places. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Professor CRAVIOTO, and Dr. Wilder-Smith will add on.
Yes, thank you. I would like to add that WHO recommends that everyone who is eligible for vaccination according to the prioritization roadmap should be vaccinated regardless whether they have had the disease or not. So therefore, we also do not recommend that we should screen for anyone whether they had a past infection or not. It is just as Professor CRAVIOTO said, in the time where we still have limited vaccine supply and where we do know that natural infection does provide a very good protection against reinfection for at least 6 months, if not 8, that we would say that those persons can consider delaying their vaccination until we have more vaccines available. It is just that we also now have seen that from some data from South Africa, that with the variants, you're less protected against natural reinfection. And therefore we said in those countries, just go for your vaccine when it's offered to you.
Thank you very much for this. We'll move to the next question. That's Jeremy Lange, RFI. Jeremy, please unmute.
Yes, thank you, Christian. A question about pregnant women. It seems that on this particular vaccine, you have more infos because what I understand is that the vaccine is kind of similar in a way to a previous one for Ebola, and that you know that it's particularly safe for pregnant women. So the question is, at this stage, is the Janssen vaccine the safest for pregnant women and breastfeeding women? And would you advise globally that it should be prioritized for this particular category of population.
I guess that's good for Professor CRAVIOTO, please. Huh?
In reality, no, we don't have more information about this vaccine specifically, excuse me, than we have about the others. In this case, we have another vaccine with the same platform that has been shown to be in the risk-benefit analysis a safe vaccine to use, and that's the Ebola one. But we do need to have specific information about this vaccine also in pregnant women before we make any recommendations specifically about it, or to show that this vaccine is more effective or more safe in this group. For now, what we have said is that all the vaccines that we have reviewed so far do not seem to have a safety profile of danger if used in pregnant women, and that the risk analysis has to be made in the sense of whether the vaccination will protect them against the possibility of having a disease, and that being a severe problem for them and the child that they're expecting. But for now, I don't think we have any vaccine that has been shown to be more effective or better for recommendation in pregnancy. I don't know if Annelies would like to add something like that coming out of the working group.
Please do.
Thank you. Indeed, all vaccines for which SAGE or WHO has now issued their policy recommendations are all basically inactivated vaccines. So they're not live vaccines. So they should have a good safety profile. It is just that pregnant women were excluded from the trials so that we don't have real data to show this, but theoretically, they should all have a good safety profile. And just to show you, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines were rolled out, are being used in pregnant women in the US with a good safety profile. I think we can be reassured about the safety issues, but of course, we want to accrue more data, and all companies have assured us that they will obtain more data also in pregnant women.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from Isabel Sacco. Long time no here. Isabel, please unmute yourself. Isabel, do you hear us?
Sorry, yes, was me, my fault. So good morning, Isabel Sacco with Spanish News Agency. I would like maybe Dr. CRAVIOTO to comment on the efficacy of this Johnson vaccine compared with other vaccines, if you can give us some details. And also, what can you say to for the general public understanding on what makes this vaccine as good as the others with just one dose? Because some people can think that they are better protected by 2 doses than by 1. So if you can explain for general understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor CRAVIOTO, please.
Thank you for the question. Given the way that the vaccines have been tested separately and have used different endpoints to be able to see what is the efficacy of the vaccine regarding what we call severe disease, hospitalization, deaths, etc., we are not in a position to make comparisons of one vaccine against another. And this idea that the percentages of efficacy that have been reported is a way of comparing them is wrong. What we have said clearly is that in this phase of the problem, what we want are vaccines that have a safety profile that has been proven, and on the other hand, that they have a defined efficacy about 50% that would allow them to prevent serious disease, hospitalization, and deaths. And in that case, all the vaccines have been shown to be able to do that, regardless of the differences that they have shown during the clinical trials. In fact, in the follow-ups that we have seen, for example, in the UK, comparing one vaccine against another after the first dose, the differences are much smaller than what was shown apparently in the clinical trials. So in that sense, I think that the vaccines should be compared in the sense of what is their impact for the general population in the way that we have shown that at this stage, which is to prevent severe disease and deaths during the pandemic. We will know more about them in the sense of whether they are able to stop the virus from going from one person to another. And the other thing that we do not know because of the length of the surveillance is how long will the protection afforded by each one of these vaccines last, whether they receive 1 dose or 2 doses. For now, the recommendation for the Johnson & Johnson is to achieve a level of protection that will allow a person not to go to a hospital or get severely sick is of 60–70%, which is what they have shown, and that is good enough for the recommendations we're making. How long that will last, we do not know, as we do not know for the other vaccines, or whether this vaccine will eventually require a second dose or a different dose if we want to prevent this same vaccine from not causing or from not having disease by another type of virus. We're talking about the variants. So in that sense, I think for now, we cannot make comparisons of that sense because they would not be valid. What we want to clearly show is that all the vaccines that are becoming available are good for this stage of control of the pandemic. I think Kate or Annelies could add something to that, and that would be good.
Kate.
Yeah, I really want to reemphasize what Dr. CRAVIOTO just said. WHO set some benchmarks for the target of what we were aiming that the vaccines would be able to do as demonstrated in clinical trials. The products that have been reviewed both for EUL and for SAGE recommendations have all met those standards. The world is in a place where there is insufficient supply to meet the requirements of people who need to be vaccinated. Clearly, any of these vaccines are life-saving products. They need to be used as quickly as we can get them deployed. People can have confidence in their safety and efficacy and in the quality of the manufacturing of the products. And so it is, it's a really not the comparisons that some people may be making between results of one clinical trial and another clinical trial. I also want to emphasize that you will see for some products where there were a variety of clinical trials that were done, the estimate, and we always refer to these as estimates on the efficacy. The estimate on the efficacy is really related to who was actually in the trial, the characteristics of people. You know, when somebody becomes vaccinated, they either will or they won't get disease. And what a trial does is it gives you that measure of the collective experience of a large number of people. But there are many attributes of those people that influence whether or not they will or won't get disease, the degree to which they avoided exposure, the other underlying conditions that they have. There's so many things, the amount of transmission that was going on in their community at the time when the trial was being conducted. So the trials are large and they are randomized, which means that we hope that the trial has balanced out those other things that affect whether or not somebody gets disease or not. But an estimate from a trial is really that. And that's why we also have a confidence interval around those estimates, because the ongoing true experience of that vaccine is going to vary in community by community, in time period by time period, in the people who are actually vaccinated. So we should not overinterpret these specific numbers that come out of trials. They're all highly effective vaccines. They're all life-saving vaccines. They're all safe vaccines, and we should get on with deploying them. So anybody who's offered vaccines should take whatever is being offered by the program and assure that the vaccines that are being produced are used to their maximum benefit.
Thank you very much for these important clarifications. I see that the status of COVID-19 vaccines link with the EUL listing the link was shared with everyone in the chat. So please refer to that at any time. The next question comes from Gabriela Sotomayor, Progreso. So please go ahead, Gabriela.
Good morning, Christian. Thank you very much. Couple of questions, short questions. One clarification. For any vaccine, what is the risk benefit? For example, for 1 million vaccines, how many accidents are normally expected? Or if there is a ratio or something like that. Then how many, if you know, how many Janssen vaccines will go to COVAX? Because this could be very useful for a country like Latin America or in other parts of the world. And third, very quick, there are many people who want to be vaccinated right now, but they are afraid of the AstraZeneca. So if SAGE has a message for them, especially for those who receive the vaccines of the mechanism COVAX.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. And I think the believe the accidents you were mentioning were first, you're referring to adverse events in general. And just to mention that adverse events can be any light swelling on your arm where you get the vaccine, which disappears in a few hours. That's also an adverse event. But I'll ask Dr. O'Brien to get into this, please.
Yes, thank you. So to address the first question, the risk benefit is, it's not like there's a formula that is applied to a risk benefit assessment. What is really assessed in a benefit risk analysis is an understanding of the disease, the frequency of the disease, the severity of the disease, the groups in whom that disease occurs, and then an assessment of the product in question. What benefit is that product actually bringing to the prevention of the disease, the impact that that product could have, and assessing that against both the nature of and the frequency of any potential risks that that product confers. And those risks actually are not just biological risks, but they're also risks that people would stop doing other things that they should be doing. The risk of a product or a program is considered in a very sort of broad context. So there's no specific formula that we would say when an adverse event meets this frequency, then we consider the risk benefit to have tipped over. It really depends on the severity. As we know from these products, it's very common to have local reactions. It's very common to have, for some of the products, a period of not feeling well, a day or two of not feeling well. And so we look at both the frequency and the severity of the risks over time in relation to the benefit. And the benefit is both an individual benefit and a community benefit. So that's the nature of a benefit risk assessment. And in the SAGE documents, you will see how the committee weighs those, the assessment of the evidence and how that evidence to the recommendations was actually drawn through what was being looked at. The issue around the Janssen vaccine, so there is an agreement in the COVAX facility for hundreds of millions of doses of the Janssen product to be deployed through the COVAX facility. There are some options on that on the numbers. So we have some flexibility around whether or not it will be a greater number of hundreds of millions of doses or a fewer number of hundreds of millions of doses. The Janssen product, like the AstraZeneca product, has a number of sites that are doing the manufacturing, and the product site of manufacture for the Janssen product would come out of BioE in India. So we will be also looking to that process to happen for the production to the tech transfer and the production to happen for the COVAX facility. And sorry, there was a question on the AstraZeneca product, and I wrote down that it was an AstraZeneca product question. Now I've forgotten what the question is. Could you just repeat the last question?
A general question about
Yes.
the confidence in AstraZeneca or in a vaccine in general.
Yes, again, I think we should point to a couple of things for the AstraZeneca product. We'll continue to reinforce them. Again, there are millions and millions of doses of the AstraZeneca product that have been deployed already, both in Europe and starting around the world. The in the clinical trials, there was no signal of a safety issue for the AstraZeneca product. As millions of doses are rolled out, it is not unheard of, it is not unusual, highly unusual to identify rare events that happen. We are in the assessment phase of determining whether or not the reports of these events recently are related or likely to be related to the vaccine. And we will really need to wait the next day or two for those assessments to be completed and for those expert committees on safety to deliberate and to come forward with a recommendation. What we know at this point, we will continue to emphasize, is those committees have said that at this point, the evidence does not signal that there is a change in the benefit risk assessment, and that there is no change in the recommendation at this point around the vaccine. So I think the reassurance to the public is that regardless of whether or not the committee ultimately assesses that there may be an association between these events and the vaccine, that in any event, these are very rare events. And we really do need to wait for the committee to complete its work and provide their best recommendation on how to proceed. But I do want to emphasize that for not just vaccines, but also other products that we decide have benefit for us. And there are known rare events that occur. And I think one example of this is, I think, a very well-known event that for some contraception, some birth control pills, there are rare events also related to clotting issues and blood clot issues. And that is a recognized rare risk for women who are taking some forms of birth control pills. And of course, in our daily lives, we also accept that there are risks in things that we do. Every time we get in a car, there's a risk that we will be in a car accident, and it could be a fatal car accident. And so we, as in our daily lives, we do also accept this trade-off of benefit and risk.
Thank you. And Professor CRAVIOTO wanted to weigh in. Thank you.
Kate, the question was also whether someone who has been vaccinated could have one of these events now after the vaccination. And I think if you would like to address that also, it would be very good.
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood what you were referring to.
Whether
I got the AstraZeneca vaccine 2 weeks ago. Would I be liable to have one of these clotting effects?
I think what is also important to say here is that the kinds of events that we're talking about are known medical events. They do happen to people who have not been vaccinated. And what we're really trying to figure out is whether or not having vaccination is itself related to increasing the risk of one of these events. So certainly people who are unvaccinated and people who are vaccinated all have some underlying risk of any of these clotting events happening unrelated to vaccine. So certainly there are people who are vaccinated who might have one of these rare events. What we don't know is whether or not that experience would be related to having been vaccinated. So I think the important point is that if anybody is having symptoms, any serious medical symptoms, regardless of whether you've been vaccinated or not vaccinated, it's important to seek medical care for the presence of those symptoms. But it really want to emphasize there is an underlying risk of these events happening. And that was why when Dr. Wilder-Smith was speaking about the control arm, the placebo arm of these clinical trials, we do see clotting thrombotic events happen regardless of whether you having not received vaccine.
One thing that I would like to emphasize is that we are actually vaccinating a much older group than we're accustomed to see, which is also liable to have a lot more different complications that normally we see in the children or the pregnant women, which have been the focus of our vaccination. Here we're really doing a massive vaccination of older people that, except for the influenza vaccine in many countries, really has not been the group that we have selectively chosen for vaccination. So we have to consider all the other things that happen with people who are over 60 years of age or even older, which has been a problem also in the sense of qualifying these adverse effects, whether they're related to the vaccine or they are something that happens just because of this is the age group in which you have a higher frequency of this type of events.
Older or at specific risk, of course, exactly. Thank you very much for that important clarification, and I hope that clarifies a lot of these worries out there. The next question I have from Christoph Vogt, AFP. Christoph, please go ahead.
Hello, thank you for taking my question. I was just wondering, like with the Janssen being a one-job vaccine, it's easier to store than most of the others. How much of a game changer is it, do you think?
Dr. O'Brien, maybe?
Yes, thank you. And I realized, sorry, in the last question, I didn't answer the specific number. Just the Janssen product has a deal with the COVAX facility for 500 million doses. So I just wanted to be specific on the number there. This product as a one-dose product is a refrigerated product as opposed to a frozen product, does provide some what we would call programmatic or operational flexibility. Clearly, it's more simple to give a full vaccine regimen where all you have to have is one encounter with people who are coming to be vaccinated and not figure out that they have to come back, 4 weeks, 12 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever the interval is, a second time. So having a one-dose product is really an advantage from a programmatic perspective. And having it out of a frozen cold chain is also more simple than it is having to keep a product frozen. It's just those other requirements are more stringent, makes it a little bit more challenging to provide a program that way. That being said, all of our infant and child programs largely are related to have products in them that require multiple doses. I also want to emphasize, though, that although the immunization programs are very used to giving products that have multiple doses related to completing the protection series, we really do see that any product that could be a single time exposure to the vaccine, so a single dose vaccine, any vaccine that would be a non-injectable vaccine would be a great vaccine and simplify the way that we have to deliver. And any vaccine that could be taken completely out of the cold chain would also be ideal. So we're still not where we would ideally like to be. And that's what the target product profile was specifying, is those ideal characteristics that we would love a vaccine to be. And that we put those out there so that developers, manufacturers can continue to improve the products towards what operationally, programmatically would be the easiest to actually deploy and make it more and more accessible. But we do see, for sure, in some circumstances, especially for migrant populations, for populations that are undocumented populations, where maybe getting people back for a second dose would be quite challenging. I'll also just point that for the products that are two-dose products, ones that we've reviewed already, there is growing evidence around the magnitude of protection that is achieved even after the first dose, although most people are going on to get their second dose. So I want us to also be clear that for two-dose regimens, the first dose is not absent protective effect. There is now evidence that we get substantial protection from the first dose. And so optimizing how vaccines are used and what the regimens are will be an ongoing effort.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Wilder-Smith to add on. I don't see on the screen now. There you are.
I just wanted to add, so I would not call it a game changer. I would call it an additional weapon, and we need as many weapons in our fight against COVID-19. And so this is an additional weapon, and we are a welcome additional weapon.
Thank you very much for this. To what I see, the last question now coming from Jamil Shad. Jamil, please, back to you.
Christian, that's very kind of you. My question is again to Dr. CRAVIOTO, and maybe as a Latin American, a question. How worried are you with the situation in Brazil and slipping out of control even to the region and elsewhere? Thank you.
I would not be able to really have an opinion about Brazil because I wouldn't know enough about it. But I can tell you that in the working group, we have one of your compatriots who has been one of the most active members helping us to understand the situation there and making it known to the group on how you have been handling with that, including the testing and the fabrication of vaccines, which is quite unique in Latin America. So in that sense, Brazil is way ahead of other Latin American countries in its capacity to actually produce vaccines locally that will be of help to the population. I think each country is having its own situation challenged by the numbers and by the difficulty in many of our countries to be able to reach those that are most in need. It is not the same thing to have a small country in which things are accessible, to have a problem in our massively big countries in which just reaching some of the population is something that is very hard. What I do think is that in Latin America, we have had, in general, some countries that have been able to organize themselves even before in their vaccination services in a much more efficient way than others. And there, I think the Pan American Health Organization has been a wonderful tool and helpful partner in the sense of setting up a lot of these issues that are really challenging, both for the COVID situation and for the restart of our vaccination services, which are really stalled, and with a huge number of children that have not gone through the process of immunization correctly and could be the source of future outbreaks in the sense of measles, or in the sense of diphtheria, or in the sense of other diseases that we haven't seen in a long time, or in the severity that we have seen recently, such as measles, which is very worrying. I would say that in that sense, the availability of vaccines now, either because countries have made the effort to buy them independently, or because they are part of either the PAHO revolving fund or the COVAX facility, is a way to be able to cope with the way that we have to handle the security of our populations at this time of need. And in that sense, I think if you look at the way vaccines have been moving on, and especially now that the COVAX ones are being deployed, I think most of the countries in Latin America will soon have the capacity to either start or maintain or continue the vaccination effort that has really just begun, and we hope will continue and improve in the next months. I would leave it at that in that sense.
Thank you very much, Professor CRAVIOTO. And with this, we come to the end of our briefing. We exceeded the time anyway. I want to thank specifically all the participants, especially also Professor Alejandro CRAVIOTO, the chair of the SAGE, who was up very early in the morning for us today. Thank you. Dr. Kate O'Brien, Director, Department of Immunization, Vaccines and Biologicals, and Dr. Annelies Wilder-Smith, Technical Advisor to the SAGE Secretariat. Thank you all very much. Thank you all for the questions. We will send the link to this webcast and the documents which are now live on the websites as soon as we can afterwards. On a separate note, please note, I was just informed you should be expecting a statement on the AZ vaccine very soon today. That's what I hear. Thank you all very much. Have a good day.